Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Promethean Action's live Thursday question and answer show. I'm so happy that you're here with us again, joining us for another week. We're going to answer your questions, taking questions from our newsletter and from the YouTube chat. Today's show is called The Color Revolution in America. It's actually been here for many decades now, but the evidence that this is actually a color revolution is now coming into American public understanding. And it is our goal today to give you a sense of the larger historical issues at play driving current events. Because that is ultimately probably the biggest issue facing MAGA is a history lesson. And you need to understand what's going on today is because of a long thread of history that's been going on for hundreds of years. This is a continuing fight to define the nature of what a country should be. Should it just be this globalized, open borders, one world language, one world government? Is that what the world's going to be? Or are we going to have a system of sovereign nation states with clearly defined borders, clear languages, clear language cultures, actual different religions? So that's the fight, and we got to win it here in the United States. I'm joined today again with Barbara and Susan. You've seen them every week. You love their discussions. Thank you, guys. Thank you, ladies. And I'm just going to open it up. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from and drop a like in the chat, because that'll help us get a bunch more people in here as we begin. Let's take a look. Thank you very much. Greetings from New Mexico. Welcome. Texas. Hello. England. So we have so much support from the UK, guys. Thank you so much. And also X.com. We know we just broke through a big thing on X.com. Okay, let's actually just get started here. I'm going to open the floor here to Susan and Barbara for any opening remarks on this whole where we stand in terms of the color revolution and what's coming in terms of the response from the administration.
Okay, so we posted a couple of videos this week about all of this in terms of showing you that this is indeed a color revolution in its classic form, actually led by people who pioneered this stuff in Ukraine and elsewhere in the recent period through the National Endowment for Democracy. But, you know, really what I think is happening here is there's a lot of people out there saying we're headed into a civil war. We don't think so. Yeah, it's very much like that in the sense that we have whole sections of the country actually acting like the South in the Civil War. But there's an election coming up, and there's every indication that the Trump administration is totally clear on what the stakes are, who the enemy is, and where we're going. And basically, we got to win that election overwhelmingly. And if we do so, we defeat the seditionists, period. So we'll be talking about a lot of specifics of that as we go through this show.
Susan, any comments?
No, I'll just say that I think that clearly the question of color revolution, civil war, all of this comes from a global force that wants to plunge us into a dark age. And when you're pessimistic, when you're plunging into a dark age, whatever your political ideology might be, it's pretty easy to set you in motion in a very destructive way. What struck me is that Donald Trump's mind and that of his cabinet is not in the dark age. They're in the golden age that they're creating, which is why there's a certain calmness, I think, a lot of the time in terms of dealing with crises where your hair's on fire, your neighbor's hairs are on fire, and so on, because they're way ahead in a future that they are fighting to create, which is a future of optimism, of technological progress, of celebrating what is beautiful in human beings. You could capture it from the standpoint of the fact that this is our 250th birthday as an independent nation, or as the declaration of our independence. And what has the United States actually been? It's been a temple of liberty, a beacon of hope. And I think that is, people have to constantly lift themselves above the fog of war and put yourself in that future that Trump and his team are creating, which is a glorious future. And then when you put yourself in that future, it's much clearer how to fight the immediate battles before you.
Thank you. I already like to give a quick shout out to Michael 4260. Thank you very much for your generous super chat. Just as a quick reminder, we are a reader and viewer supported operation. We don't do corporate sponsors. We rely on the donations and support of viewers and readers like yourself. Thank you very much. If you have a question, just send it in the chat. I'll try to get to it for you. So thank you very much. So I guess we should just jump into the first question here, which is something that Barbara already kind of mentioned on this issue. In your last couple Thursday shows, you have made some very useful big picture explanations. We need more of those. I have used this description often. I think we are a country at war, a civil war of sorts, but not kinetic. So we do not see it or even know about it. The Monday update about Minneapolis seemed to support that. Can you big picture for us? Who is the enemy? Seems the globalists, principally the Imperial British economic control. And are these Antifa cells, the enemy's foot soldiers, now more visible? And then many congressional reps, not foot soldiers, but paid for traitors. Thank you, Bob from Michigan. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on whether this is an actual war and who are these people that are on the other side in terms of Antifa, people in Congress, we have people in the media of all these different things coming at the American people.
Well, as Adam said at the beginning, this is a long-standing process which is now coming to actual historical fruition. If you look at Antifa, its first emergence in the United States was in 1987 in, guess where? Minneapolis. And the reason for that is that came as the Soviet Union was in the process of collapsing, the Berlin Wall was falling, and the oligarchy at that point, which is, as you rightfully say, the new British financial empire centered in the city of London and their allies on Wall Street and in the offshore drug and money laundering apparatus, which they have set up to loot things. They had to come up with a new system. So they basically put together all kinds of terrorist operations at that point to run what they call hybrid warfare against nation states that were resisting them. For example, Russia, they called a revisionist system, i.e. people who didn't want to go along with this nonsense. So that's who we're up against. And what Trump has done is he has called them. He has called them out directly. He has come forward last week at Davos through Jameson Greer with an explicit endorsement of the American system of economics, which is completely different than their system. It focuses on production. It focuses on increasing wages for the labor force because we're trying to foster human creativity and inventing a new future rather than being sucked into simply a looting mechanism, which is what the British Empire is. But, they have been in control of our country, literally from, that period forward. And one could argue since the end of World War II, when they actually suckered us into the idea that communism was going to take over the world unless we came in and became the world's policemen for their imperial aims. So that's really the big picture. We could drill down a lot, but you have to think about this as we're in a process of, what the Chinese like to call people's war. And that's what insurgencies are all about. And people make a mistake when they think, well, the response to that insurgency has to be military only. That's not how you defeat it. That's maybe 2% of the actual armament you need to defeat it. You need to neutralize their support base. And that's what Trump is doing through his economic policy. And that's why the media is so, basically focused on trying to block all of this stuff out so that you don't know about it. And that's the hole we're filling right now. That's our mission. to fill that hole and educate you and show you exactly how you respond to all of this. Tom Homan's press conference today in Minneapolis was a masterclass in how you actually defeat these guys and neutralize them by the calm voice of reason. If you want to just play that excerpt, Adam, I don't know whether you can or not.
No, I got it.
Okay.
All about the organization and the fun of the attacks on ICE. Well, first of all, about the attacks on ICE. Well, first of all,
quick thing here, people. I'm sorry. This is a very soft clip. It was literally just released, so I'm going to turn down. I'm going to try and turn up the volume as much as possible, but you might need to boost it over there.
All about the organization and the funding of the attacks on ICE. I'm not going to answer a lot about that because I'm not going to show our hand, but they'll be held accountable. Justice is coming. Again, we got to all remember why the questions we've seen and why we're here. What started this? 4 years of an open border, where millions of people are letting this country unvetted. Remember, let's not forget, for 4 years we were told the border secure. 4 years we were told the border secure, and we all knew it wasn't. And I want this to be a positive thing we're doing here today. I also want to remember the politicians are continually attacking us. Where were they the last 4 years when the number of women, children, sex trafficking went all-time high? Where were they when 250,000 Americans died from fentanyl coming across the border? Where were they when women and children are dying making that journey? Where were they when over 4,000 aliens making that journey died? Historic record. Where were they? Not a word. Now we're just trying to respond to what happened the last 4 years and keeping this country safe. And we're arresting a lot of public safety threats, take them off the streets, which make this country safer. President Trump promised to make this country safe again, and that's what we're doing. But my 2.5 days up here, we made a lot of progress. I think everybody agrees on the criminal and public safety threats. They agree it's much safer and easier to arrest an alien in a facility than send a whole team out in the field that's going to draw anger, because now we got to send a bunch of people to do something that could have been done by 1 or 2 people.
Okay, so turn down their volume a little bit now. Okay, so that was a Tom Homan press conference. I think that just happened this morning.
Yes, basically, I put a link to the full press conference, Adam, which you might want to give to people a little bit later. But what he said, if you didn't hear it, is we know where the funding is coming from. We know who's behind this, and justice is going to come. I'm not going to tip my hand right now, but justice is going to come to these people. The second front, which they've opened, is they just appointed a new attorney general in the Justice Department, reporting directly to the president to prosecute fraud and to prosecute all of the fraud. His name is Colin McDonald. He's apparently a star prosecutor in the U.S. Department of Justice, and he's going to be the guy who goes after all of the welfare fraud, all of the fraud in government programs through the Somalis and other immigrant networks in both Minnesota and in California and in New York City, where this has become the vote mechanism for the Democratic Party. All right. So the administration is very clear what they're doing and who they're going after here. And I think that in terms of Minnesota, you're going to see big results.
Yeah, I'll just take it even a step back, since Bob asked for the bigger picture, and locate this historically, because what Barbara said in terms of the apparatus they set up in the post-1989 period, or pretty much everything that they've set in motion since the end of World War II, has been using the United States as their dumb giant, strategically, economically, and otherwise, not to our benefit, but to the benefit of this imperial elite. In fact, you could extend that to some degree all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century, when the British were very clear. They established the Round Table, Chatham House, the Council on Foreign Relations, that their purpose was to set the policy for the United States so that they could use them to continue their imperial policies. And in the current period, you see it packaged as globalization. So what do you see in the current period? Well, as we discussed extensively last week, the administration went to Davos, and between Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, and Donald Trump, they, declared globalism is a failure. It's over. We're not playing by those rules any longer. And everybody in the establishment has basically been forced to acknowledge, okay, what we had set in motion over this longer sweep of history, and I would submit pretty much going back to the beginning of the 20th century, is over. And that is why you're starting to see a reversion by this imperial elite to their earlier, much more open strategy against the United States going back to the 19th century, which is why, as I discussed in my update the other day, Lord Palmerston is suddenly coming out of the mouths of various people in the Anglosphere. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Pierre, whose last name I can never remember how to pronounce, Poilievre, up in Canada and elsewhere, are talking about Lord Palmerston. Why is that important? Because Lord Palmerston played a significant role in the British Empire from the early part of the 19th century right up to his death in 1865. What was his mission? To make sure that the principles of the American Revolution and the American system did not spread. How did he do that? By creating color revolutions. That's not what they were called then. It was called Young Europe, Young England, Young Italy, Young Poland, Young America, but creating the equivalent of what you're seeing in terms of color revolutions, especially all over Europe, but also in the United States, to destabilize countries, to make sure that they could not develop as the American Republic had developed. And what you're seeing right now, by the fact that Palmerston is suddenly being discussed, is a layer of the elites recognizing, okay, we've been outflanked by Donald Trump. And all of this kind of, behind the scenes way of controlling or attacking the United States is no longer working. It's like they're ripping open their suit and you're seeing their big Superman S. What they really are is a brutal empire which will destabilize nations internally, visibly, is right out there in the open. But I would just conclude by returning to what I said at the beginning and what Barbara said about People's War. The way you defeat that is not intensifying your civil war apparatus. The way you defeat that is recognize what it is they're afraid of and wield that. They're afraid of the American system. They're afraid of genuine economic growth and cultural optimism. And that is what people have to constantly recalibrate to when you think about how to battle this.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. I'd like to also say thank you to everyone in the chat who joined us every week. I can't respond to everyone, but I do try to read every message. Thank you everyone for the support. I'm going to go through a few super chats here. Then I am going to address the question of what is a color revolution, because this came into a bunch of questions by email. I'm getting them in the chat. I got one on the website this morning. So we're definitely going to get to this issue of what we mean more about color revolution in just a moment. So first, a quick shout out to thank you, Sedona Solutions, for your support. We have a free newsletter. The link is in the description. Yes, it is free. There is a selection there. It's totally free. Please get our free newsletter and like and subscribe. BSV Maximus, thank you for joining every week. We really appreciate having supporters like yourself. It's because of our most hardcore supporters coming back week after week that sends a really positive signal to YouTube and to social media. So thank you very much. Daniel Keller, thank you very much. Love your work. Keep grinding. We have no intention of stopping. And in fact, we plan on building out Promethean PAC to be a massive electoral force in the United States. So yes, we are going to keep grinding here. All right. So this is a little bit of a tricky question, but I don't want to ignore it because These are the kinds of questions that we get from all over the world. So I'm going to take it, even if we don't spend a lot of time on it. So Light of Freedom 1980, thank you for being honest and letting us know what you think. Why did Trump recently sign a memorandum to accelerate 6G deployment with a stated goal to operate implantable technologies? Sounds transhuman. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this question?
Well, first of all, I think that what you're seeing is very much related to Elon Musk's attempts to actually create a situation in which people who are paralyzed with spinal cord injuries and other such things can actually regain some level of human life. It does not mean that you're replacing human cognition. It means that you are replacing the neural mechanisms which have actually been destroyed through, some sort of accident, disease, or what have you, so that people can actually exercise their human cognition, which is different than transhumanism, because transhumanism says that the human mind is somehow replicable by simple, computerization or, AI or something like that. It's two different universes we're talking about. All right. It's the universe of, it gets to the problem, if you know it, in philosophy, of how do you square the circle? You got, and you can't do it because you're talking about two different planes of reality. All right. And that's what has to be, you have to constantly think about when you're thinking about AI. What makes it dangerous? What makes it dangerous is because we're in a deficit in terms of the higher order of human thinking, in terms of the higher order of creativity, which we actually need to bring to the table at this point, which is the actual function of the human mind, which no computer can replicate. So that's how I'd answer your question. I think it poses some fascinating issues in terms of how the human nervous system, which is what you're talking about here, actually works, and how it interfaces with the human mind. Because what you're going to see as you attempt to exploit these technologies is the limits that it actually comes up against in terms of what it can do and what it can't do. So that's how I'd answer your question.
Thank you, Barbara. I think that was actually a really good question. I was thinking exactly the same thing. This issue of Elon Musk, what he's doing with Neuralink. Now he just announced that they want to do something for people that are literally blind. And I support 6G. I'm a millennial. I grew up with we were the first smartphone generation, basically. And as much problems as smartphones and social media technology appear to cause, I think there could be a day in the future when human beings finally learn how to live responsibly with all this communication technology. I support communication technology. So I hope we answered the question. Yeah.
Let me just add, I mean, it's totally a cultural question. I mean, you could make the same arguments that people are making about these technologies. Well, it could be used this way. And you could, that's the same argument that the liberals use against guns. Guns can be used to shoot somebody. Well, yeah, by criminals, or by, 3-year-old by mistake shoots his brother. That's bad. But, as thinking people say, it wasn't the gun that did it. And it's the same thing with the technology. It's only going to be a question of who's using it. If the World Economic Forum is running the world, it's going to be a dystopian nightmare. If sovereign nations are running the world based on American system principles, we'll use it for the benefit of mankind.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Okay, I have another super chat here with a serious question. I think we're going to talk about this more in the show, but I think it's important that if somebody asks it now, we should take it. Thank you, JL Gray. What do you think the chances are of us winning in the midterms, as in keeping both the House and the Senate? I'm so happy I found you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before Barbara and Susan say anything, I just want to say what I think. Our chances are determined about how many MAGA people we can bring out to the election, as if this year were a presidential election. So if we put presidential election effort into bringing people to vote, MAGA people that sit at home, right, that are so taken up by these crazy conspiracy theories, they don't go to vote. We need to bring these people to vote. So I'll open this up to Barbara and Susan. What do you think our chances are in actually winning the midterms, as in keeping both the House and the Senate?
I mean, I think Donald Trump is exactly kind of the approach that Adam just identified, because what just came out of the recent RNC meeting is a rules change where the Republican Party now has a rule where they can hold a midterm national convention. As people know, every 4 years, the big, extravaganza is the convention that chooses the presidential candidate. I was privileged to be at the last one in Milwaukee, and it pulls the party together. It solidifies the message. And what Trump has stated, and what the RNC has now opened the door to do, is a midterm convention, national convention, which obviously won't do any business. We're not going to be choosing a presidential candidate, and we won't be choosing the candidates at the state and local level. That's done through each state procedure. But to actually pull the party together, why? As everyone in Michigan knows and is tired of hearing me say, in the midterm elections, Donald Trump will not be at the top of the ticket, but his policies must be at the top of the ticket. And that is what I think they intend to do if they go ahead with this midterm election, to brand this election as a referendum on Donald Trump's policies. Because I can tell you, you get down to the state and local level, people start to get really squishy. Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to lose votes if I'm connected to Donald Trump. I'm going to just address the local issues or the issues that the consultants package for me, the hot button issues and so on. That does not win elections. Donald Trump and his policies, I'm sitting in Michigan, that's what wins elections. And that's why they're moving. It's not official, but they're moving toward this kind of midterm election. The key to the whole thing, and we'll get into it a little bit more, the key to the whole thing is how effectively people can bring Donald Trump's economic and strategic revolution right to the doorsteps in their neighborhoods and communicate to people just how revolutionary a period we're in for the better.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, so I'd like to give a quick shout out to Julie Yost. Thank you very much. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. We do 3 political updates a week, plus this live show on Thursday. And we also have a free newsletter. The link is in the description. I encourage you to stay in contact with us. Also, a quick shout out to Lynn's. Lynn, thank you very much, Lynn, for your support. We hope we're subscribed. Thank you. We can't do any of this without the support of people like yourself. So thank you very, very much. Okay, a quick question here, kind of related to the last. How will President Trump present the rigged 2020 election in the media? What will the format be? Barbara, any thoughts on this?
Well, I think we're going to see pretty dramatic developments very shortly. I mean, people may be aware that the warehouse in Fulton County, Georgia, was raided yesterday and is still being raided today by the FBI. And I found it most interesting that it wasn't just the FBI who was there on the scene in Fulton County, Georgia. It was Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. Now that tells you something. It tells you that what's being looked at here is not just whatever nonsense those local poll officials in Georgia polled, but what's being looked at here is foreign intervention in the Georgia process, probably through the voting machine company's dominion in terms of rigging the vote. Probably, I can't say for sure, actually related to Venezuela and Smartmatic and what role that actually played in the Georgia elections. That would be my guess. Okay, and you're getting there to something which then becomes very interesting, because who was the actual person in charge of running Smartmatics operations from Venezuela. It was none other than Lord Malloch Brown from the British Empire, George Soros's partner in crime during the entire post-1989 period. So I think we're looking at something here which may be quite dramatic and really quite unexpected from the standpoint of what really happened here.
Thank you. And now we're going to get to the color revolution. I'm going to start with this one here. So thank you, Ram Luxama. Color revolution took place in South Africa in 1994. DEI and feminism has killed our country along with fraud and corruption since. Thank you for your work. And thank you, Ram, for your support. And I'm going to combine this with a question we got from our email newsletter. Thank you, Lorraine, for this question. I'm new to your information. What does color revolution mean, please? So Barbara and Susan, what are the color revolutions?
Well, color, all right, obviously means something in the sense of what I'll call branding, which is what they actually did. You had all sorts of revolutions after 1989, 1990 in the former Soviet bloc of countries. The Rose Revolution, the Orange Revolution, the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity was a little bit different in Ukraine in 2014, but they attached a color to it. And they were primarily run by a joint effort of three institutions in the United States. The National Endowment for Democracy, which I covered in my brief in some depth yesterday, the U.S. Institute for Peace, which people may remember at the beginning of Trump's term was a big target. They went in and closed it down. They were caught trying to destroy all their records. And then it was reorganized under the Trump administration. And that's a very significant part of this. And USAID. And where this came from was that after the exposures of the 1970s Church Committee and other hearings in the United States, the CIA and MI6 lost the capacity to actually just change regimes in foreign countries. They needed something which would give them plausible deniability, but wasn't directly the CIA or MI6. So they invented this blob of entities working through the National Endowment for Democracy, working through USAID with the arm of the Institute for Peace. And, basically various foundations and NGOs joined this operation, not only receiving funding from the United States government to do this, but also doing independent funding of this entire apparatus. George Soros's Open Society foundations are kind of the keys, but Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, all of the big foundations were also involved in these processes. So what they do, which is what we're seeing now in the United States, is all of a sudden a corruption probe would be bubbled up in a country which had been targeted for regime change. Some type of crisis would be boiled up. And then pre-trained assets of the intelligence community would be deployed into that situation. You had total control of the media, total control of the information being given to the public, and foot soldiers trained in what was called nonviolent resistance, which was not really nonviolent resistance since, property crimes were considered to be nonviolent, i.e. you could go in and burn down churches, go in and burn down everything. And then always having a provocateur, always having an armed terrorist presence behind the so-called nonviolent people, so that you could actually provoke incidents where people became martyrs, all right? So if you think about it, what we're seeing in Minneapolis is a classic color revolution kind of operation. the Maidan coup in Ukraine was also kind of a classic operation. The thing that's remarkable about that coup is that they think they perfected something called full spectrum information warfare, where not only did you control all the information getting out to the public, you actually control behavioral techniques through your communications, which cause people to essentially go nuts, and to become Jacobin radicals if they were only slightly predisposed to doing that in the first place. And when people look at the Democratic Party these days and what we call TDS, or Trump derangement syndrome, that's really a product of this type of warfare. And what we've called for and what we think is essential is you got to open the books totally on all this stuff. You got to, come to Jesus and actually admit what we were doing and how this worked, so that people actually can understand what's going on. And we've got to bring people who did this kind of stuff to justice, because this is what was turned on Donald Trump beginning in 2015.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Adam just popped up on the screen there, that person who said Soros has called this purple revolution in Minnesota. I was just watching one of my other favorite channels. Shout out to Rich Does Politics. He has us on all the time, and he's got really good people who get you behind the scenes in terms of the role of the British in all of this. But he was interviewing somebody who had a lot of expertise in this, and they were talking about the fact that, the symbol in Minnesota right now, the color is purple. And of course, it's all the signs are very professionally made. Everything is very coordinated. And one of my other friends, Tom Luongo, who also is on Rich Does Politics a lot, he actually had something on his X account. I should have had it available, but I don't. It's a shot of a poster in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, a sticker on a lamppost, mobilizing people to come out and demonstrate. And it says, do this, do that, congregate at centers of power. And he points out that centers is spelled CENTRES, which is the British spelling for centers of power. So this stuff is not random. This stuff is not grassroots. And yes, the current color is purple, which is actually kind of interesting, because that's also the color of royalty. And of course, that's who's really running it all.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. All right, a few super chats here. I think this is a very important question. Barbara, you might have a thought on this. I noticed Fulton just popped off, and then the SAVE Act is being pushed in the Senate. Interesting sequence. What are your thoughts? Is there a connection there?
Absolutely. A part of what people don't understand is some stuff you see publicly in the Trump administration, a whole lot is being done through a very disciplined and behind the scenes, back channels, all sorts of things being planned and set up, only to be popped up when it becomes necessary to do them. So yes, the SAVE Act is being pushed in the Senate. It's a good way to distinguish between who you should vote for and who you shouldn't. And Fulton did just pop off. I think I went through that before, and I think I went through the potential significance of that entire episode. If you remember, that was the center of one of 4 prosecutions against Donald Trump. And all 4 of them were all about the places where the elite felt most vulnerable in terms of what they had done and what the evidence was that was out there ready to be plucked.
Yeah, let me just say, and in fact, we did have a very nice question sent in to us where somebody sent a sample letter for your senators on the SAVE Act in terms of putting pressure on them to back the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act has been passed in the House. It's sitting in the Senate, hopefully now moving. It's legislation which basically says only American citizens can vote. But the senators are going to have their feet held to the fire to do this. And that is a very important thing that any American on this call should do as soon as this is over. Call your senator's office and tell them they damn well better vote for the SAVE Act.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. I'd like to give also a huge thank you to everyone in the chat. Thank you for joining us every week, everyone. We really depend on your support. That's how we've been able to grow. So thank you very much. If you're just joining us, please give us a like. If you've been tuning in for a while and like what we have to say, please just give us a like. It helps us reach more people on YouTube. And just as a reminder, we do have a free newsletter, email newsletter. That's how we're primarily staying in contact with people. And it also gives you a chance to reply to our emails and get stuff back to us. So get our free newsletter. The link is in the description. I have some more super chats, but I'm going to switch to the next question from our newsletter here because I want to get some questions in from our newsletters readers. So I think this next one is also a very good historical one, and it also addresses this issue of insurrection in the United States. I just started reading Churchill's Folly, and I'm getting a better understanding of some of the things you have been saying on YouTube. I feel that Trump should not use the Insurrection Act to deal with Minneapolis because it plays into their hands and destroys too much of what we have gained. Your feelings? If this is not an appropriate question, I apologize. I do love your work. Charles, is a very appropriate question. Thank you for letting us know what you actually think. And I open this up to Barbara and Susan for your thoughts.
Well, I agree with you. The whole goal here is to suck all of the media coverage and the air out of Trump's economic offensive. What's the key to the midterms? Yesterday, we had this whole, savings account set up that the president is doing for people who have kids. I think that's enormously important. But when you look at the polling and it says who knows about this, 10% of the population even knows about this. That's the problem. The more they can deflect and cause you to get involved in these battles to the death at certain locations in the country without being able to turn those things to your advantage like Holman just did, the more you suck the air out of getting the essential message across, which is the economic transformation of the country and how it differs from what we've all lived through horrendously in the last 40 years. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and let me do the historical reset too, because you've got operations on both sides. I mean, the leftist, liberal, radical, anarchist, insurrectionist side is pretty obvious. But you've got another side, which is like a radical side on the other, which just wants to inflame things, which is going to play into people's hands. Now, I mean, I understand people are upset. They're saying we should have the Insurrection Act because they're looking at this stuff and it's scary. I mean, anybody who doesn't look at this and know how scary it is, where you've got carefully coordinated, terrorist operations on the ground, stalking the ICE officers, stalking the reporters, threatening hotel employees. It's scary. There's no question about that. But as Barbara said, they want to turn it up to the boiling point. And what Trump and his team want to do is turn it down. But you have to recognize, shall we say, on our side of the fight, you've got people who either wittingly or just because they're stupid, and probably for most of them, it's just because they're stupid, are pushing this emotional, let's go all the way kind of thing. And I do want to reset it to American history. Think about the Civil War. The Confederacy, slavery, that was an abomination and it had to be dealt with. And they seceded from the United States, which had they succeeded, none of us would probably be here today because the United States would have been finished. But what did you have on the other side? You had the radical abolitionists, which Abraham Lincoln did not support because they were basically saying, okay, who cares? Let them go. We want to, we're going to have freedom up here, and, we're going to go all the way immediately and so on. Lincoln knew that both sides of this were going to destroy the unity of the nation. And we would not be here if Abraham Lincoln, through his genius, his courage, and his sacrifice, had not brought the United States of America intact through that terrible British fomented crises of which Lord Palmerston had a lot to do. And I think Trump, I mean, when people are getting impatient with Trump and the Justice Department, and they're not doing enough, well, first of all, as Tom Homan just said, hey, boys and girls, we're not going to tip our hand. I mean, give me a break, But, and when the time is right, they move like they did in Georgia. People have been, flapping their jaws about Smartmatic and all this kind of stuff since 2020 and 2021. Was there any way to prove it? No. And as Barbara suggests, now that we're in Venezuela, now there's actually a way you can seriously pull a thread and do something actionable about it, as opposed to, well, it's obvious. Well, it may be obvious, but that's not going to get you anywhere in court. That's not going to get you anywhere in the real world. You actually have to have a level of rigor and seriousness to move this thing forward. And everything I see coming from the Trump administration, it operates on that basis. Or as Tom Homan said today, I didn't come out here for headlines. You don't carry out these kinds of operations, especially something as big as foreign interference in vote fraud, for clickbait and for headlines. If you want to do it, you've got to have a serious investigation, and you actually have to have the capability to get to where the bodies are buried, which again, as Barbara suggested, perhaps because of what's just happened in Venezuela, we might actually be able to get where the bodies are buried.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Thank you again, everyone, for the support. Let's do some super chats again. First, thank you, Paul Ranum, for the support. Please make sure you get our free newsletter. It's the best way to keep in track with what we're doing. And we're going to be doing a lot more coming up soon. So thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Peter Hume, friend from the European Union. Thank you so much for your support. We depend on patriots and people like yourself to keep us operating. Carol, thank you very much. Please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel. We do 3 political updates a week you don't want to miss. His Pearl, thank you very much. Every cent helps us reach our goal of saving this country and defeating globalism, because this issue of globalization is one that touches the entire planet. This isn't just an American problem anymore. This is a problem that's infected the entire planet. So thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate it. Okay, now I have some quick things. First, Stephen Montclair, silver is not going to save you. Yes, only Jesus can truly claim that power, although silver is off to a... So I don't have that much. Okay, I have a little bit of like silver dollars or whatever, but it's crazy. Just looking at all the asset price inflation is going up. Okay, Barbara and Susan, any thoughts on just the price? Like, assets are going up, the value of currency is going up, stocks are going up, the value of assets are going up in general. Any thoughts about that? Is that a good thing? Trump obviously talks about how the stock market, 401ks are going up, right? Everyone's investments are going up. Is this a good thing? Is this sustainable for the United States?
Well, the thing that's sustainable for the United States is build physical infrastructure, physical factories, physical wages, for the working class, to put us into a position where we can exercise the full power of the American system. What happens in terms of the pricing of gold, silver, all of these other things are key to actually understanding how the dollar works within the framework of what has been the post-World War II system of trade and exchange. There's a lot going on in the economy right now. You have, the unraveling of what's called the Japanese carry trade, which is creating a great deal of financial instability and probably is going to come here. I'm watching it, and I'm very interested in what Scott Bessent is going to have to say about that. It's obvious that the Federal Reserve is once again not helping things by, failing to deal with interest rates, because, potentially you're going to have to basically get interest rates down as we face the crisis coming in from, our involvement with, all of this nonsense in terms of the carry trade and everything else on Wall Street. So we're entering a very interesting time. But I really think that Trump has adopted the right fundamental approach, which is we're going to put all of our assets, all of everything we can take from the market, all of everything we can bring into actually creating an economy which is based on actual physical production, not the gambling house, which is Wall Street. So that's how I'd answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add, we have a problem. The dollar has been an instrument of the financier elite since 1971, when we took the dollar off the gold reserve standard. So you're faced with the challenge of how do you basically definancialize the dollar? How do you drain out the speculation without crashing the whole system overnight and restore a kind of sovereign tether for your actual currencies? That's a very challenging question. Now, I have friends who think that there are forces who are using the silver and gold and the way that those pricing mechanisms are, as you mentioned, going through the ceiling, as moves against the City of London in terms of sort of figuring out a way to definancialize the dollar. I think we're going to have to see how that all plays out. But I think the fundamental point is exactly what Barbara said, which is the only way you ultimately restore real value and real stability to an economy is if your economy is based on building things, as opposed to just, magically moving financial assets through supercomputers in nanoseconds.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Okay, and this one's really important. I want to take it. I was going to keep it, but I want to take it now. Thank you, Disastrophe. I see some saying that Susie Wiles is giving bad advice to the president on purpose. What's the evidence that she's for Trump's agenda? I don't know enough about her to form a reasonable opinion. Thank you very, very much. I just want to say something on this. You kind of answered your own question. I don't know enough to form a reasonable opinion. So, Barbara or Susan, what? Because all these crazy things that are out there on social media that are literally there to sow doubt and confusion about what Trump is actually trying to do. And then you're admitting that you don't even know enough to form a reasonable opinion. Okay, Barbara and Susan, what are your thoughts on stuff that people say stuff like this? Because this comes up all the time.
Well, who is controlling Trump? That's really the question which is being asked here. Is it Benjamin Netanyahu or the grand wizard of his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, or is it, X, Y, or Z? And the simple answer is nobody is controlling Donald Trump except for Donald Trump. You should have learned that by now by watching him operate. You may not agree with everything he does. I don't. But I love him nonetheless because he is constantly his own man. That's the thing you've got to understand about it. And the way they're attacking it, people that I follow and trust who know a lot about politics say that Susie Wiles is basically running an extremely disciplined cabinet operation and is one of the best chiefs of staff to ever exist. The fact that you don't see the opposition to the president, which came through the chief of staff in the first term, where they had somebody in there who was deliberately sabotaging him. And if you actually look back and see the difference here, you would have to basically conclude that this woman is a Svengali devilish genius of all time to have controlling Trump through everything that's gone on. I think she's doing a masterful job. And I think all of the stuff that's being said about her is along the lines of Trump is being controlled by because he's really stupid, because you really believe he's stupid, malleable, constantly just out for his own ego, being stroked by people, all of the things which circulate add up to, well, he's just a dummy sitting there in the White House that all these people are controlling. The evidence is not there for that hypothesis at all. I tend to believe, just like he has said, he's a very stable genius. And that's what gets him into trouble with the elites.
Yeah, I'll just add, I read one account, which, I'm not going to go on the basis of accounts, but it definitely rings true in terms of what Barbara just said, which is that Susie Wiles is, one of the first chiefs of staff who went in there, and she didn't try and manipulate, or change what Trump is trying to do. She's trying to facilitate what he's trying to do. So I think people's problems, if they have any, are not with Susie Wiles, they might be with Trump.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Okay, I have some more super chats lined up, but I'm going to switch back to questions coming from our email newsletter. So the next ones are just going to be on Minneapolis and what's happened recently with Waltz and supposedly capitulation. What did Trump do to get Waltz to cooperate? How does this affect the color revolution started in Minnesota? Thank you, RB, for the question. And is Trump capitulating in Minneapolis? Thank you, Glenwood, for the question. So what is currently going on in Minneapolis? What should we expect to see in the next coming weeks and days about this, especially about the Signal Gate? The type of coordinated, it's beyond coordinated. The leaks keep coming out. The amount of connection between parts of the state government and these protesters. So what's going on in Minneapolis?
Well, I want to take the last question first, and then I'll turn it over to Barbara. I mean, is Trump capitulating in Minneapolis? Look, it's what I just said in terms of the abolitionists versus the Confederacy. The British want to, the globalists, the elite, the British, their stock in trade is inflame people on both sides so that you can create a civil war situation. And, anybody who thinks that Trump is capitulating, just go watch Tom Homan's press conference, as Barbara indicated. He's making very, very clear. He's extracting concessions from people in Minnesota. Not enough. He was very clear. We didn't agree on everything. But we did agree on is if they have a illegal alien in a local prison and he's about to be released, they're now going to notify us so that we can arrest him right there without having to go into the neighborhoods, which is going to go a long way toward achieving the mission that Homan outlined, which is we are going after the people who are risks to public safety. And if your local official has arrested one of them, why would you let them back out into the wild to go threaten the people of Minneapolis again? So they've achieved a level of cooperation on a kind of baseline basis. And as Homan said, if this goes forward, we're going to be able to, begin to reduce our forces in Minnesota. This administration is operating not from the standpoint of, again, headlines, clickbait, and emotions. They're operating from the standpoint of trying to achieve their mission of as outlined in the campaign, and not fall into the trap of blowing the United States up in the process.
We don't know what caused Tim Walz to capitulate. One can assume that based on what we've seen so far, that the Justice Department has the goods on his participation, along with that of Keith Ellison, in this entire fraud scheme. And the announcement last week that essentially the Justice Department was going to create a new division focused on exclusively this type of fraud against the United States government. I think if I was sitting in Walz's shoes, I'd be sort of, doing what with bricks, okay? And I don't think it's accidental that he withdrew from consideration for the governor's race, and that Senator Amy Klobuchar is running in there as fast as possible to try and salvage something by appearing much more reasonable than either Waltz or his buddy Jacob Fry there in Minneapolis. So we'll have to see. But I think, as in all Trump negotiations, he's holding some pretty deadly cards in his hand here. And they don't have a lot of cards other than violence to actually proceed against that.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our live question and answer show. If you're just tuning in, we do this live show every Thursday. We have 3 question and answer shows that we do. We do 3 political briefings on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So like the video, subscribe to our channel, and let us stay in contact with you. Okay, let's go through some super chats before I get back to the newsletter questions. Any thoughts on Peter Schweitzer's book, The Invisible Coup? Thank you, S. Kelsing, for the support. Barbara, Susan, have you read this one before?
I'm reading it right now. I think it's very important. I don't necessarily agree with some of his conclusions, particularly about Mexico, but he's very, very focused on something which is quite important, which is called the Sao Paulo Forum. And for people who don't know about that, that was a specific intervention by Fidel Castro and the international Marxist movement into Latin America. And it functions in conjunction with the drug cartels to have created essentially all of these failed narco states right on our border. And he points to, which I think is very important to think through and think about, he points to Castro's Mario boat lift. If people remember that, who are of my age, it's all the way back in the Jimmy Carter administration, where Castro took all of the people from his insane asylums and from his, prisons, and said, we'll send all these refugees to the United States. And Jimmy Carter, being the beating heart liberal that he was, said, oh, I'm freeing all of these poor people who are being tortured by communism in Cuba. We gradually caught up with what it was, which was an organized effort through immigration to completely subvert the United States. So I think that's a very important kind of thought to think through. People get all upset when President Trump comes out and says they're sending the people from their prisons, their insane asylums, etc., and they think of Jimmy the gardener and say, that's not true, my gardener is a great guy, etc. What the hell is he talking about? This is what he's talking about. All right. And he's talking about the idea that you can use immigration as a weapon against a culture in the United States. And that is, I think, a very significant concept. I tend to, have a little bit of doubt about what he's saying about Mexico, because I view Mexico, he's saying basically that the Mexican government under AMLO and others is essentially subscribing to Castro's strategy, and that they're trying to reconquer those areas of the United States which Mexico previously possessed through various indigenous people's movements, etc. I think that's potentially true as political rhetoric. I think it's what the Morena Party uses as political rhetoric, but I don't necessarily think that's the controlling dynamic here. The controlling dynamic is the transnational criminal cartels and the British imperial policy of using these terrorist and other formations in what I just described as people's war, cultural war, color revolution against the United States. So I think it's an important book. I have to finish it to see how much I agree and disagree with him.
You guys should start doing write-ups on your x.com. It's getting kind of old. Sure, people would love to hear from you about that. All right, thank you very much for your support. I have another one here. Thank you, Raymond Rodriguez, for your support. Please make sure you like this video, you subscribe to our channel. We want you to stay in contact with us. We have plenty more to say. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to Rolling Stoner. Everyone, give a thumbs up in the chat right now if we want a Canadian 51st state. I would love to have the most productive part of Canada by far. I would love to have you guys productively part of the United States. I'm sure you guys would too. So everyone, give a thumbs up in the chat if you want to see a Canadian 51st state. Thank you very much, Rolling Stoner 79, for your support. Okay, so I'm going to take some more questions on Antifa. because it kind of goes along, and I think it continues on this theme of really trying to understand this color revolution here. So I'm going to take a few of these together. Okay. If our government has known about the corrosive practices of subverts and Antifa for 40 years, why have they waited until now to act in a constitutional manner? I battled those punks over 20 years ago in Portland. Portland police just watched. You know, it's funny. So this organization that I'm in has been around for decades, but we started a youth movement back in the early 2000s. I was never up in the Pacific Northwest, but yeah, 20, 25 years ago, our organization used to have so much trouble organizing in the Pacific Northwest because of these Antifa elements, which have been organizing there for like decades now. It's crazy. But I'm going to take a few more here. Recognizing that there are external forces that have been unleashed by the British here in the United States, most recently in Minneapolis, Minnesota, why hasn't the Trump administration neutralized this in its tracks? In other words, crush and destroy every tentacle of their existence. I'm sure that the administration is noticing your proactive historical analysis leadership. They've quoted your organization and identifying their devious deeds here in the United States and around the world. Thank you, Michael S., for your question. I have another question here from Kelly M. Do you believe that sending Tom Homan to Minneapolis is the final stepping stone prior to sending the 11th Airborne Troop from Alaska? Thank you, Kelly, for your question. And the last one here on crushing Antifa. Great work, Team Promethean Action. My question is, with all of the historical and current facts made public regarding the intentional and deliberate tactics used by the British against America, why the hell hasn't President Trump and his administration taken them to the woodshed and crushed them once and for all, including the insurrectionists there in Minneapolis and elsewhere across the country? Enough is enough. Thank you, Michael, for your question. I think the enough is enough thing is really capturing the feeling that a lot of Trump supporters have, and seeing this radical leftist movements take over our streets and our educational systems. So what took our country so long to deal with this Antifa problem, and how are we going to deal with it?
Well, I mean, I'd say two things. Number one, we finally got Donald Trump back in office with a team that actually can do something about it. But number two, again, I would ask people to stop and think from the standpoint of, headlines, immediate emotions. I think this administration is going for the apparatus that deploys this stuff on the ground. I think they're functioning very surgically. I think they're moving in ways to each step of the way expose more of the deeper, higher level of the apparatus, because that's what you want to get. Yeah, you could send the, airborne from Alaska into Minnesota, and then it would pop up in Los Angeles. And, and because it would be overkill, it would suddenly pop up in places where you don't have this kind of stuff going on. Whereas what they're doing, and don't forget, Scott Bessent went to Minnesota right before Davos and announced that the Treasury Department is carrying out a very intensive investigation of financial institutions and 501c3s. Now you have the appointment of this new prosecutor that Barbara just mentioned. So I think the administration is moving very deliberately, not just to get the ground troops, because there's probably an infinite number of ground troops the enemy can ship in or move around the country. You arrest a bunch of them here, and boom, another busload comes in from there, or it starts someplace else. I think what this administration is doing is going for the head, not the tentacles.
I would just add that up until the Trump administration, there's every reason to believe that Antifa was a protected asset of the United States intelligence community. So that is kind of the explication for why not before.
That makes complete sense. And now that Trump's in office, we're going to uncover all the stones that are hiding all the stuff underneath them, all the hidden bugs under there. All right. Thank you, Barbara and Susan. That was a pretty simple question. Let's take another one here on the midterms, because this is really everything that we're discussing should be seen in the fact that we need to win another presidential election this November. See it as a presidential election, people. So let's take this next one. This is a very prescient question here. Thank you, Kevin, for this question. We really appreciate it. It shows that we have some real political people out there that are thinking about this seriously. There is some, but not much talk about the midterm elections and getting out the vote. But where is the emphasis on the soon occurring primaries that we have the right, so that we have the right candidates in the midterms? I've yet to hear anything about the primaries. As normally happens, we the people will be left to vote for rhinos in the midterms, which many conservatives refuse to do. Thank you, Kevin, for your question. Barbara and Susan, your thought on this question of the primaries coming into the midterms and the Republican Party?
No, it's a really, really important question. And that's why our political action arm, Promethean PAC, has launched what we've called the Midterm Boot Camp. Can you share the screen, Adam? Yeah, that's just the logo for it. If you want to be involved in the Midterm Boot Camp, just go to either Promethean PAC or Promethean Action, either website, and send us a message through contact with the words organize. And we'll let you know how you can participate in this. We held our first one 2 weeks ago, and the video for that is now on the Promethean PAC website. Again, to be clear, we have our policy arm, which is Promethean Action, and we have our Political Action Committee, which operates under all of the rules of the Federal Election Commission, and to which only American citizens can contribute for all of our friends in the rest of the world. And this will be the spear point of our intervention into the midterms. What we did in the first one, and again, you can watch the video, it's on the PAC website, is we had two candidates from Houston who are running in primaries. And Houston is the earliest primaries in the country. It's in March. I don't know of anybody else that's that early. Not a big state anyway. And what their names are: Helen Zhao, who's running for state rep, and Alex Hart, who's running for Congress, both in the Houston area. And their districts actually encompass, urban, poorer demographic areas. And the way that they've conceptualized how to bring Trump's golden age idea into their election is by focusing on the fact that there are vocational and skilled trades training facilities in Houston, whereby people in these poor communities, people who are kind of trapped in dead-end welfare society and so on, they're making clear to people, your kid can now go get a skilled job and come out of one of these apprenticeship or vocational programs and immediately start clocking in at $60,000, $70,000 a year. I think the median income in Helen's district was less than $30,000. So the way that they're thinking of how do I bring Trump's golden age idea into, my door knocking right on the grassroots level in a way that it's going to have meaning and it's going to break people out of their anti-Trump or victim mentality, is with this kind of tremendous opportunity. That was just what we did in the first boot camp. We're going to have another one, as I say, tomorrow. And again, if you want to get the information of how to participate, you can go to either of our websites and just send us a message that says organize. These are the kinds of things that, we want people to think of. How do I translate this into political organizing? And this is what answers our friend's question about the primaries. Because the way that we've got to get better candidates, and we do, because once the Republican candidate is chosen in a primary, given the stakes in this election in the Senate and the House, you're going to have to hold your nose and vote for them. I mean, unless it's like a complete, abomination. So you're right. The fight is getting the best candidates before we get to that. And we think that is a question of bringing the question of what Trump is actually doing into the political debate, seeing who responds, creating an educated electorate that says, oh, I want somebody who's going to fight for Trump's program, not somebody who's out there pushing some old Republican Party policies of, I don't know, attacking, everybody in the inner city for being a welfare bum or, whatever. I mean, we all know what the old Republican Party was. I'm just going to show one other example of how we're thinking through, and we don't have the whole picture of how to do this. How do you communicate to people that Trump is actually unleashing a golden age? And I think that is what is going to define our success in the midterms. This is something else I put together yesterday just with a few data points, and I want to get more. This is so exciting. These are factories or facilities that have reopened because of Trump's policies. In some cases, I think there's one where an aluminum facility is opening up where for the first time in 70 years, we're going to be producing this in the United States. In another case, we're opening up a graphite facility where for the first time in 50 years, we're going to be doing it in the United States. In other cases where, factories were shuttered for 2-3 years because of the previous policies, and they're opening up. I'm sure there's a lot more examples like this, but, what we want to communicate to people is, again, put your mind in the not too distant future in terms of what the United States will look like if we give Donald Trump the Congress that he needs. And I think that if we're spearheading that kind of idea, intervening into our various local races, recruiting, you're absolutely right. You got to have quality candidates, but you've also got to have an educated electorate, because those of us who have been involved in grassroots politics, and election campaigns, you can have a great grassroots candidate, and if he has no money and you have a stupid electorate, he's going to lose. And sometimes those great candidates have trouble getting money. What's the solution? Make their electorate smarter. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Susan. Nana Banana Pro, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It messed up a little bit, but it's okay.
You can probably help me do it better. But anyway, I'm just going back to, again, anybody who wants to participate in organizing with us, go to Promethean Action or Promethean PAC. Just send us a message that says organize.
Yeah, let me just say, just as a quick recap, because I know this is confusing for people. We have two organizations because it's actually a really good strategy for us. Promethean Action really allows us to catch a really wide international net of support. We can capture people that want to support this pro-American anti-globalization movement from around the world, and you can contribute to Promethean Action. So thank you very much for helping us build Promethean Action into something that's stable, that we can grow. But the next thing is this Promethean PAC. This is a nuance of American election law. Promethean PAC has to focus, if we're going to focus on federal elections and being able to influence federal elections and put money on them and do get out the vote campaigns, or let's say run attack ads or run advertising for a candidate or against a candidate, that kind of activity has to be done through Promethean PAC. And Promethean PAC can only accept donations from U.S. citizens, or I believe legal resident aliens can also contribute. Barbara can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what separates Promethean Action from Promethean PAC. We're part of the same fight. It's just they're vehicles for different things. So that's a good way to understand why we have two organizations. It may seem a little bit confusing, but that's the reason why. Okay, I saw some super chats come in here, so let me just take one before I get to the next question for my newsletter. So I didn't even read it. Let's see. Bill Warner, thank you very much for your support. Like many here, I assume, I never really considered the influence that the British Empire has had on our nation until I came across Promethean Action and the updates from Susan and Barbara. Thank you. Before I open up the question for them, I would say the best way to understand the influences is look at our Ivy League universities and what they study in those universities, right? That has been British influence now since, I don't know, how long? But okay, so let me open this up to Barbara and Susan now. Thank you, Bill, for your question.
Well, I think Adam makes the essential point. After World War II, the British came out with an orchestrated campaign which said the British Empire is over with. The new empire is the American empire. That's who's acting all over the world as the world's hegemon, which is what the British used to do. That's a lie. All right. That's simply not true. In fact, after World War II, what happened is that we got conjoined with the British Empire. Every single one of our intelligence agencies began working with MI6 and began working with Five Eyes and began working with British intelligence agencies, so much so that entire floors of our intelligence buildings actually have British intelligence agents running floors of them. All right. So that's the thing you've got to basically think about. All right. And this was not a transition which actually occurred flawlessly with everybody laying down. It was a fight throughout after the war. And gradually, through what they call soft power, the Round Table has a very specific strategy here, which is to, number one, erase and censor your true history so that everybody's shocked. Oh my God, I've never heard about this American system stuff before. All right. Well, the reason is it's been erased from our university education completely. Hamilton is characterized as either a British agent, which is one of the lies told about him, or a tool of the Wall Street bankers, all right? When the reality is that he created a system which is the antithesis to all of that, completely and totally. Abraham Lincoln's economist, Henry Carey, who actually won the Civil War, is wiped out from history. All right. It's assumed that essentially the systems that are economic systems in the world are either Adam Smith's system of British economics, in its most recent manifestation through Milton Friedman and von Hayek and Ludwig von Mises and the libertarians, or communism. Those are the two choices you have of systems in the world. And what Karl Marx actually realized is that the American system called his bluff, that if you actually had constant technological and scientific progress, there was no such thing as the falling rate of profit, which is at the center of most communist, theories of capitalism. So they have gotten us all screwed up because we've lost our own history in many respects. We have all this crap about how, we were slave societies from the beginning. And when the British Empire and other colonial empires invented slavery and actually brought it to the United States, it was not at all indigenous to our founders. And so you have all of this crap, which has nothing to do with our real history or our real culture. We're like a big culture of scientists and inventors. People don't know. They think Benjamin Franklin was like a very practical guy who somehow flew kites. Okay. He was in reality a Renaissance genius who, most Europeans at the time actually admired as the equivalent of an American Einstein, which he was. So we've lost all of that, and it's now 250 years in. And I think if we actually resurrect it, which was what we're trying to do at Promethean Action, people will really see the light in terms of what we're really all about.
No, I want to just drill down on how important this question of the American system is and remind people that, while Howard Lutnick and Donald Trump kind of created the fireworks at Davos, by just taking the globalists head on, one of the most historic speeches was given by Jameson Greer, our trade ambassador, and it was entitled the Hamiltonian economics, which most people have, never heard about. That's a paraphrase of the title, but Hamiltonian economics is in there. This is a deadly threat to the control of the globalists, because the way that they have kept people controlled, again, as Barbara said, you write out the American system. So what are your two choices? British imperial capitalism and communism. So if you're not a British imperial capitalist, you're a communist. That's the world that they actually want you in. Now, some of you may run into some silly attacks on us that are percolating out there in social media, and they basically boil down to, well, if you're attacking the British, that means you're a Marxist. And that's exactly in this stupid world where you have British imperial capital, finance capital, you could call it, and you have communism, and you're one or the other. And you throw the real history of the United States, you put the American system out there, and now you have an administration which is officially embracing it, and you blow apart decades, if not centuries, of the way they actually control people's thinking.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. And Bill, I just put up just a quick follow-up. You guys have really shifted my focus away from the daily chaos to the much bigger pictures behind the scenes. Thank you. Bill, I need to make sure that you're getting our free newsletter. I need you to stay in contact with us. What you're expressing is exactly what our mission, what we're trying to do. We're trying to take people just out of the consumptive day-to-day news cycle. We're all inundated with it. There's almost no way to avoid it. Okay, we understand. But we're trying to build within American citizens a principle of leadership. And leaders focus more on what they are able to affect and change in the world. And by shifting your focus away from the daily chaos, right? There's something there in the daily news cycle. It's not completely vacuous, there's something there. But by taking your mind away from the daily happenings and trying to place yourself as like a strategic commander, trying to win a battle that's been lasting 1,000 years. This is the fight that we're in. We're still in this fight of trying to get human beings to understand that they are not cattle to be treated like cattle, herded like cattle, and trying to build a system of government that treats people like human beings and not like cattle. So that's a very long human fight to build systems of self-government. So thank you very much, Bill, for opening up to us. Please make sure you get a free newsletter. We're trying to do a lot more, especially with our political action committee. We want to become bigger than the Republican Party, because maybe that's a tall order, but
well,
we're trying to do something.
Here's what's not a tall order, Adam. We can be more effective than the Republicans.
Yes, that's I like that idea better. We're gonna try and become more effective in moving the American population to the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is an effing joke. All right, I'm gonna continue. I guess from saying that, we just got a whole bunch of new super chats. So let me just get through a few more of them here. Okay, Sala, thank you very much. Can you start and end transmissions with pointing everyone to our toolkit homework to learn the origins of the British worldwide deep state? Yes, we will do that before we will bring up the toolkit. Thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure, I'm sure you're getting our free newsletter. Maybe consider reaching out to us about our midterm boot camp and actually getting involved in November. That would be super awesome. Thank you. New Life, thank you for joining us. I don't know if you've been here every week, but if you have, please make sure you're getting our free newsletter and to subscribe to the channel. Already got you. Grunt, here's another longtime supporter. Hey guys, enlightening information as usual. God bless you guys. I've heard the Prez speak to Republicans on how the Democrats stick together regardless of their wacko ideas, and we need the same glue to fight back. Yes, this is why my frustration with the Republican Party is like, it's getting so high. This is exactly it right here. The Republican Party is just completely split. You have part of the Republican Party that's like the old guard Republicans, right? The free traders, the ones that just believe in the free market economy. And then on the other side, you have this MAGA thing, this MAGA thing that we represent. And if MAGA doesn't take over the Republican Party, and if we don't change the composition of the senators, the Republican senators like Ted Cruz. God, if we can't get rid of Ted Cruz in the next like 5-6 years, oh man. Okay, so thank you, Grunt, for joining us. Thank you for tuning in every week. We'd love to have your support. Grand Pedo Vic, thank you. They stopped teaching history because they say it's racist. They are hiding truth. How can we change this? We're doomed to repeat it. Barbara and Susan, how do we change this process of this crazy cultural rewriting? They're literally trying to rewrite our history and our culture like in real time. How do we interrupt this process?
Well, you interrupt it by actually producing the real history, and getting people excited about exploring all of these topics and finding out about them, finding out about national banking and how did that work, finding out about Henry Carey and the Civil War, what Lincoln actually did, not all the lies about him, finding out about how did slavery actually work? And you're going to discover that, it was a colonial policy completely outside the United States, which originated in all of the British, Portuguese, and other colonies in the Caribbean. And it was a deliberate subversion policy against the United States, just like the Mario boat lift in a certain way. So that's the point, is you've got to get to the true history. We have a whole history and palette of things that we've done in some 40 years of studying this. We first started looking at the American system in 1975, 76. There are many, forebearers who went, ahead with that and actually produced the studies, which, underpin this. And, we're going to make all of that stuff available in our toolkit and fill it out for you. But there's lots of other things that can be done. There are authors out there who are wonderful and no longer, like James Fenimore Cooper, for example, or Edgar Allan Poe, all of whom actually were using the weapon of fine prose and poetry to get across how you defeat the British Empire. Kind of an interesting concept, isn't it? But that's what Poe was all about. That's what those stories are all about. What kind of thinking is involved in actually solving the mystery, for example, of the Purloined Letter. Those are mental exercises which he was doing for an entire population, using the instruments of fine prose and drama, to just like Shakespeare did, to actually show you what real history looks like. So it's a war for our culture, but the instruments are out there. They're not lost. They have to be picked up and wielded at this point by a whole new generation of scholars dedicated to actually bringing these ideas to light.
Yeah, I'll just add one other aspect, which Barbara touched on. And that is, there's obviously a huge wealth of real history. We've tried to resurrect a lot of it. Again, you can go to the toolkit on Promethean Action. Maybe, Adam, you just want to pull that up while I'm talking. Because we have ebooks, we've got authors who have written extensively on different aspects of American history and economics. We have collaborators, may not be on the toolkit, but other people have written things. But it actually starts with the underlying hypothesis in terms of how do you think about the world? Because you can give somebody all the facts you want, and if the actual way they look at the world is still trapped in the imperial way of thinking, those facts are just going to roll right off of them. You have to start from the fundamental cultural question, which is, what is your image of man? And the image of man, from the empire, going back metaphorically to the gods on Mount Olympus who tortured Prometheus, their image of man is that man is just an animal. You're just a beast. The better bred beasts among the elites get to, cull you. They get to manipulate you. They get to send you off to wars. They get to work you to death and so on. That is the imperial view of man, that you're no better than an animal. And if you look at the key British liberal philosophers like David Hume Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. That is their explicit image of man. You don't function on any level better than an animal. Maybe you can reason a little bit better, but you can't create anything new. You're trapped in the world of sense certainty. And then what has driven Western civilization since the time of Plato, and then what has shaped the revolution that was caused with Jesus Christ and Western Christian civilization, is a different image, which is right there in all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And what makes us, in the image of the creator is our creative reason, our ability to constantly discover better how God created this universe so that we can exert dominion over it. Your history has to start there. It can't just start with, I'm going to pile up these facts versus your facts. Never works. It has to start with that basic methodological question. And what Barbara was referencing in terms of James Fenimore Cooper and Edgar Allan Poe, I would add my favorite author, Plato, it nourishes your ability to think from that standpoint of human creativity. And I'm going to do one other plug at this point, because this weekend, we're going to do an incredible class series, a class on our Promethean PAC class series, which is on the issue of classical music and how important classical music is in fighting the cultural degradation, in fighting all the weapons of the empire, and why the oligarchs and the elites hate real classical music. So that is going to be a very, very important discussion, which people can participate in live. If you're a subscriber to our newsletter, you'll get a notice about it. And we always post those discussions on the website afterwards. I think that's an extremely important question in where we are in this battle right now. Because if more people are conscious of this fundamental difference of the two images of man, and how do you strengthen and cherish human creativity, we're going to win this fight a lot faster.
Thank you. I just want to do a quick thing on our Promethean Action Toolkit. I've seen a bunch of people already ask about resources and about homeschooling. What do we homeschool people with? So if you search the web for Promethean Action Toolkit, you're going to end up on this web. You should end up on this website. We have a list of some resources, including 2 pamphlets that we have. This first one is on our economic plan, what President Trump can do with the American System 2.0. It's kind of a high-level overview. And then a second pamphlet we have here is a police dossier, how it's the British who murder our presidents. And it goes in some of the history of Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy, plus some other history on our fight with the British Empire. So that's available here. And then at the bottom here are some books by our authors, Promethean Action authors, affiliated authors, Brian Lance and Bob Ingram. And we have a selection of historical topics here. And I think in the future, it's something that I would like to organize is a Promethean Action book club, because it's something that people ask us about a lot. There are a large group of people out there that want to educate themselves, and people like to know what books we're reading so that they can become more like Barbara and Susan, especially. So we're working on the book selection. Yes, we need to be publishing more. Our organization is filled with like 50 years of knowledge, and I'm trying to like unlock all this knowledge from all these people that we have in our organization. So yes, search for the Promethean Action Toolkit. We'll be filling out that toolkit with more educational resources coming up, so you can check out the toolkit there. All right, let's continue on with our questions here. Before I go to the super chats, let's go to some questions here. We're going to go to one on counterintelligence and the other side. So this is a question from Mike. In the 1960s, the federal government commissioned the CIA to run Operation Chaos and the FBI to run COINTELPRO. The objective of these activities was to infiltrate, spy, and report on domestic radical groups and anti-war movements. To what extent do you believe this sort of surveillance is going on now? Thank you, Mike, for your question.
Well, having been a primary target of COINTELPRO back in the day, I know a whole lot about that particular series of events. However, what you saw in the Biden administration was a reenactment on steroids of those programs actually centered on destroying the Trump political movement. I'm not opposed to infiltration, spying, and doing everything you need to do, not on quote unquote peaceful protesters, but for example, Antifa, or that subculture which actually led to, Charlie Kirk's assassination of the combination of trans radical groups and Antifa. And I think we have to take a look at what role our government played during the Biden administration in creating essentially all of these current groups and taking them apart, because they're not peaceful operations. These are terrorist formations. That's what they are, treasonous terrorist formations, and they need to be taken apart using all the legal tools we can use. Now, we're faced with what people get all upset about is how come there are not more indictments or what have you. Well, we've got a specific problem we've got to overcome, which is most of the judiciary and a great deal of the legal profession at this point are on the other side. All right. So, and they're doing all sorts of things to try and screw up the variability which we have to have in our intelligence community to go after these organizations and prosecute them for, alternatively a civil rights conspiracy or outright sedition. But the problem is you have to basically figure out how to get these in venues that actually understand what's going on versus prosecuting them where most of them live, which is in the blue states and the sanctuary cities and all of the areas of outright rebellion. So you got a lot of people who won't come into the Justice Department at this point to help prosecute with Donald Trump because the legal profession is all lined up against this at this point. So that's a very concrete problem. We've got to get it solved. We've got to get it solved in our law schools. We've got to get it solved in the Supreme Court. But again, the legal system is not where you actually solve this. You solve it politically at the voting booth and with people on the ground actually understanding what the war is all about and acting accordingly. So I would just add that one of my favorite historical anecdotes has to do with Hitler's rise to power in Germany. And when you look at what's called in this type of study, the correlation of forces, what you had an on-the-ground formation through the SPD and other political organizations in Germany, which were sufficient to actually defeat Hitler. But instead of going into the streets and actually doing what they had to do at that point in time, they went into court and sought an injunction against Hitler, as crazy as that impotent action might seem. So it's all about education. It's all about learning what we're up against really. And it's all about being very creative and flanking these operations, not running head first into the enemy's machine gun nest, which is right before you.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. The next question is going to be on UK and immigration. I have a super chat and a question to go right along with it. So thank you first, Fed Up to the Eyes. Thank you for your support. We're trying to do as much as we can for people around the world that are fighting these anti-globalist movements. So I'm going to take your question and a very similar one from our newsletter. We need Trump in the UK. Starmer has let the Muslim party to be formed in the parliament. One of them is a convicted terrorist. We are going to end up like Iran. And then I have a very related question here from Julie. Thank you, Julie, for this question. If the British believe they are superior and seek to dominate the world, why in the world would they be importing massive number of Muslims and migrant peoples who are taking over the UK and on track to destroy the national identity of the British people and weaken their institutions? If this continues on pace, they will have an ungovernable migrant majority that completely ignores British law. What is the reason for this? What's benefit is this to the UK elite?
Well, I'm going to make one broader point and then let Barbara get into it in a little more detail. When we say the British, let's just be clear. We're not talking about people who have an allegiance to the British people, to the historical nation of England, the nations which comprise the United Kingdom. We're talking about an imperial elite which could care less about the British identity. They happen to geographically be squatting there. The City of London has played a critical financial role. The monarchy, and in fact, the monarchies in Europe are not archaic institutions as people think. They still are a critical arm of this imperial elite. They play a certain soap opera role, but they have other roles as well. That's what we're talking about. So I just want to make that point because, again, they could care less about the nation, the people, the culture, and so on. As to what it is they are trying to do, I'll let Barbara answer.
Well, they're out to destroy the nation state, and that includes the nation state of the UK. All right. What's good for the goose is good for the gander here. How can I basically, on behalf of the UK, if I'm Starmer, advocate that the rest of the world actually have a completely open society if I'm not doing it in my own country? It's the problem which the EU has at this point. They're on a complete suicide march around these policies. Well, why don't you stop? It's because they actually believe their own propaganda at this point. They're fervent believers in their own system. And there's a certain level of, if it's spilled out, exactly what they've done over the past 20, 25, 30, 40 years, they're all cooked. So they have a huge kind of incentive to line up behind the current system, or to run over to China, like Starmer just did, and say, please embrace us. The alternative is the United States. I saw a very funny post from Kirill Dmitriev, who is Vladimir Putin's economic advisor for the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Russia today, who said, who did a joke on X, which is very funny if you think about it. He said, forces in China are all upset with Xi Jinping because he didn't attack the human rights record of the UK at this point when Starmer visited. If you think about that irony, is pretty funny. I'm not sure he's not going to get a little bit of a wrist tap on that for making that kind of ironic joke, but it's a pretty funny joke. Look, I mean, the problem here is you have this whole crazy system which they've invented, and they're absolutely dedicated to it, regardless of the consequences. A primo, the deluge is probably the right mental state to invoke here for most of these people, and that there's no rational reason that you can say why you keep, essentially engaging in suicidal actions. It's all very irrational and based on the fear of actually embracing something new, which would mean that the elite has to admit that it's failed, and that they will not do at any cost. So that's what we're facing here in terms of that particular series of problems.
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I agree. This is the end of the nation state. This is what they're pushing for. That's why they don't care about the British national identity anymore. They don't really care. They don't care about they don't care about the American national identity. They're trying to build a one world system, a homogenized language, one language. Unfortunately, it's chosen to be English, for better or for worse. Homogenize the world with English. Homogenize the world with a single type of entertainment culture. Unfortunately, a lot of that worldwide entertainment culture comes out of the United States, but it's supposed to be for everyone. Right? You can be whatever you want. You can be whatever gender. This open society, that's globalization. So what you're seeing happen in Britain and in Europe is exactly what Barbara said. It's the elites buying into their system and saying, if we want to have an open society for the world, we need to bring that open society into our own countries. So that's how I would answer you. Thank you very much, guys, for the questions. I'm going to take some more super chats here. We have plenty more really good questions and comments. First, thank you, Karen, for the support. Please make sure you subscribe to our free newsletter. And ham and cheese. This is the place I want my mind to live. Thank you for saving me from the madness of the moment. Yes, that's what we're literally trying to do. Please make sure you get our free newsletter. I'm slowly working through upgrading the newsletter, putting more updates in it and stuff. Please get our free newsletter. Stay subscribed to our YouTube channel. We have plenty more to say, and we hope that you would join us on this mission that we're on here. Okay,
and ham and cheese just made me hungry.
Yeah, it's getting close to my lunchtime too. Okay, I just want to answer this quick question. We know we get a lot of people that are honestly trying to figure out the world. So is it true that the U.S. is under a second constitution? No. And it's renewed every 2 years or so? No. Law of the water and law of the land? No, none of that's true. Barbara and Susan, do you have anything to address on this? Because this is just all the kinds of crazy stuff that people believe on the internet, and they come to us wanting us to tell them if this is true or not. So is it true? Is the U.S. under a second constitution?
Well, I see a lot of this stuff. It's all based on, it's all based on kind of people go into the realm of legalisms and they get really stuck. I mean, this is one of the favorite kinds of ways that the internet memes and cyber operations work. Do we have admiralty law and, basically the fringe on the flag and, this type of stuff? None of that's true. And people would be really well rewarded to simply say, no, I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to look at the U.S. Constitution. I'm going to really understand the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And those two documents, if you focus on that, rather than all of the legal, I call it the legal cyber camp out there on the internet, your mind will be remarkably refreshed.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, put yourself back in where we are in history today. They're terrified of Donald Trump. So just keep asking yourself, what is it about Donald Trump that terrifies them? Not all of this rabbit hole stuff.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. And yes, we have another insightful comment from Andrew Thompson who says, disband the American Bar Association. I don't know, maybe Barbara would agree with you a little bit. Thank you very much for the support, everyone. We really appreciate it. I'd like to say thank you to Paul. Thank you, Paul, for joining us every week. We really appreciate it. David Gray, thank you for joining us again. We love having all of you guys from across the pond joining us on this fight to rid the planet of this globalization problem. Sedona Solutions, again, thank you for the super chat. We really appreciate it. Michael Pearson, every dollar helps. Please get our free newsletter. Don't even worry about contributing monthly. Just get our free newsletter and let us stay in contact with you. That's so important. Okay, here's an interesting one. I know only the brief about this. Maybe Barbara and Susan know a little bit more, but I know this actually is an important part of the history. Why are you missing the mention of the Kalergi Plan imposed to the world in 1921? Coudenhove Kalergi. I forget exactly what position he held. He was some kind of royalty, I believe. But there was a plan, I believe it involved mass migration. Do you ladies know anything about this? It's something we should definitely, because Lyndon, we wrote papers on this, the Kalergi Plan. We wrote papers on this. So unfortunately, we're not prepared to say anything too extensive on it right now, but I think it's something that we should probably look into for sure.
That will do. I can't really comment on it right now. I just have a passing idea in my mind about it, but I don't want to put it out there.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, that's something. Yes, I know that is part of the history of immigration. That's definitely something we're going to look into. So thank you for bringing that up. P. Murphy, thank you very much for the support. And Jen Provence, thank you, $50 for the generous super chat. Please make sure you get our free newsletter. It's the best way for you to stay in contact with what we're doing and what we're thinking. Michael Pearson, what happened to the word Americanism?
Well, I think
We're gonna have to
Donald
bring it
Trump has
back.
brought it back from the standpoint of America first. So,
Okay. Yes, we're going to have to bring it back. Thank you very much, Michael. Okay, we received over 150 questions again this week, guys. I've only taken about 10 from the list. If I didn't get to your question, I'm very sorry. I do promise you, we have read every single one of your questions and considered every one. So we have to keep the shows focused to keep them on topic. Okay, I'm going to take number 17, which I think goes along with exactly what people are thinking about in the midterms. Okay, will there be enough time for Trump's efforts to become entrenched back into our system in the United States? In other words, are the big changes he's made able to withstand imperialist attacks of restructuring to their agenda? Okay, he's done so much in such a short time, which is why the midterms are so important. But will they stick in the medium and to the long term? Thank you, Diane, for your question.
that's a really great question, Diane. And the answer is really right back at you. As we've made clear, as other people have made clear, we have to win the midterms. We have to deepen the understanding of the MAGA base and more broadly the American people in terms of the nature of the fight, the historic transformation that Trump is bringing about, because it's going to have to stick in 2028 too. And it means you're going to have a true Trump heir take over the presidency in 2028. So we have two steps in this fight, the midterms and 2028. I know somebody, maybe it was Adam, brought up Ted Cruz. I mean, he's not just a problem now. That man is going to run for president in 2028. He is going to be the anti-Trump, one of the anti-Trumps in 2028. And if our people in Texas can do something about that, they should. But I think the key to all of this is, again, in this domain of ideas. If you have an American population which understands what the real principles of our nation are, who the historic enemy has been in terms of its ideas, and how everything that Trump is doing on the economy, but also on foreign policy, is a restoration of those American principles, then people are going to figure this out and they will make the right decisions. Now, we have to do a lot of work. And again, our midterm boot camp is going to be talking about, some more of the nitty gritty of how do you actually do that. But you've asked the $64 gazillion question, in terms of what the challenge is before us.
Yeah, I just add that you're dealing with a media blackout of the actual policies. All right, that's really quite fundamental in terms of what we're facing. And a lot of the people who should be all on message at this point, actually out there saying what the president's policies actually are carping and moaning and bitching about this, that, or the other. That's not helpful. It throws into doubt what side they're actually on at this point, if you understand the dynamics and the nature of the battle. We've got to basically educate people, Diane, about what you're actually saying. You obviously know how much he's done. That's why Susan said right back at you. How do you actually take that out to your circle of friends and neighbors and expand that, in ones, twos, and threes, till you could basically say, as of 2026, I brought, 400, 500 people to the polls, very concretely in terms of the president's agenda. That's the task. It's actually being able to lay out these economic policies, actually understanding them, and actually, being able to pinpoint the battles which are occurring around their implementation. The way this is traditionally talked about is, well, if there isn't a huge influx of income to everybody by the time the elections roll around and the midterms were done. All right, I would phrase it a little bit better. There will be an increase. Is it gonna basically end the torment of the last 40 years or 50 years once you actually understand what we're fixing here? That's the concept we've got to get across to people. For once, we have a president who's on our side, not on the side of the bankers or on the side of the elite, and is really trying to get this stuff implemented. What he needs is citizens like you out there as organizers, which is where our boot camp concept actually comes into play.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Let's hit up a few super chats here. Can you address the continuity of government as a mechanism? Don't know exactly what to say with that. Thank you, Tricky Vicky, for joining us. Any thoughts on the continuity of government? I guess we don't want that to take. We want to keep Trump alive. That's for sure. I can say that.
Yeah, I think that's probably been kind of looked at in the reorganization of the Defense Department or the War Department. And obviously, if I'm looking out for the president's survival, that's one of the things I'm going to look at, as a primary objective. For people who don't know, the continuity of government deals with things like a nuclear attack on the United States, what happens with the government, the presidency, etc. Where do they go if someone gets knocked off in the middle of that? Who's the next in line? All of this, again, points to the midterms. If you have a continuity of government in which the Speaker of the House is a Democrat, where the hell are you going to be in terms of some kind of national emergency like that? It's one thing I wouldn't particularly focus on, but it is a concern when you actually think about where the country is.
Thank you. Okay, let's finish this up here. I got just a few more super chats. I do want to say thank you for everyone. Thank you, Doc Durden. I consider myself a great student of history and an observer of truth, but you have put my glasses on many missing points I've been missing. Thank you, one and all. Cheers, Doc. And yes, thank you, Doc, for your support. Again, same thing. Stay subscribed to our YouTube channel. We have a free newsletter. Just stay in contact with us. We're trying to do so much more. Cat Joe, thank you. God bless you for having a clear mind and joining us and listening to us on this mission. We'd love to have you aboard. Please get our newsletter and reach out at any time if you have any questions or comments. And thank you, Cool Mom 2456 for the super sticker. YouTube tells me it's your first time on the stream. Thank you so much for joining us. Get our free newsletter. The link is in the description. Don't even worry about paying for it. Just get the free one. You'll get most of our stuff, and it'll give us a chance for you to stay in contact with what we're doing because we are trying to do something really awesome here. Okay, final question here. I'm going to take this one because he kept putting it in here, and it made me smile a little bit. How is Ted Cruz anti-Trump?
Well, he is a rhino, despite his effort to actually embrace Trump. He's a neocon monster who, like Lindsey Graham, hasn't seen a war, which he isn't all about. We should get involved in. He is, people talk about, the so-called Israel lobby in the United States. That's where he gets his contributions. Everything about the guy stinks to high heaven, including his legal background. He never got over the fact that he lost in 2016 to Donald Trump. And the people who are behind him are behind actually not allowing this Trump revolution to continue, pure and simple. So he's the Nikki Haley of 2028. He's the Ron DeSantis of 2028. Although I'm not eliminating the idea that DeSantis himself is going to jump back in for another failed candidacy. And all of this crap about J.D. Vance at this point, I have to say, I think it's just that. Vance is doing a Yale man's job, and it should be clear to you, if you're thinking about it, that he is the president's designated successor. He's the vice president of the United States. That may change, all right, as circumstances develop and as other things go forward in terms of who's the guy by MAGA and by Trump to succeed him. But the idea right now is this is the guy, and that's why he's taken all the fire that he's taken. So I think people have to step back from that and realize also that he's not going to be put out there. Donald Trump's not going to be putting him out there as my successor. He really wants to succeed right now as Donald Trump. That's the game right now. It's not about 2028, and people are trying to make it about that in order to demoralize the movement and switch us away from the task, which is immediately ahead of us in terms of the midterms.
Yeah, I'll just conclude that let's kill two birds with one stone. The question of 2028 is not, placing your bets, your OTB bet on win, place, or show. The question of 2028 is, do people understand what Donald Trump is doing and ensuring that he succeeds right now? So ensuring that Donald Trump's policies succeed right now in 2026, 2027 is going to create the kind of climate where you will pick the right Trump successor in 2028, which I agree with Barbara at the moment certainly seems to be J.D. Vance. But that will be determined by our success right now. And that's what Vance is focused on, and that's what Trump is focused on, and that's what everybody else should be focused on.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I have people keep sending in super chats. This is so tough. Okay, just really quick. President Trump won 17% of the black vote in the last election. Is there a way to engage them for the upcoming midterm? I think Trump's already trying to do that by running his midterm like a presidential election. But let me just pull up these last things, and this is going to be the last set of questions here. What about the perpetual debt and financial industrial complex? Okay. And finally, I am Gen X. How do I get my parents' generation to understand what's really happening? Okay. Yes, I know. All the boomers are entrenched in the legacy media. We're trying
Not all the boomers.
Okay. Any final comments here on legacy media, black vote in the midterms?
Well, I think the black vote in the midterms comes back to what I was saying. The more that we can communicate to people, especially in urban areas, I'm like our candidates in Houston, and I'm focused on the situation in Detroit here. People in Detroit, which used to have the highest per capita standard of living in the country. Now the median income is below $30,000. I mean, you can barely buy car insurance and, pay your mortgage on that. How do you change that? You bring back the manufacturing jobs, which is the gateway into the middle class, they used to say. So I think the more that we translate Trump's economic policies, especially into lower income areas, actually show them there's a vocational training center right here, or maybe work with the Trump administration to bring one in to your city before the midterm elections. That's the kind of thing that's going to move the needle in that area.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another Thursday live question and answer show. We're getting close to 200 questions a week from our email list. We get at least 10 to 20 topics in these questions. And it's like this person here, Doug, I'm very sorry. Believe it or not, though, the questions that we get from the super chats mirror the questions that we get from our newsletter people. So that's why I take a lot of super chats, because I'm going to ask these same exact questions anyway. And I'm very sorry. I know people feel left out, but we simply can't ask 200 questions plus another 30 super chats. We're going to be here for like an 8-hour show. I agree. Maybe we should be doing more shows. We're looking into that. But I just want to say very sorry if we don't address your question directly. We're not doing it to you on purpose. And I know that's just the challenge of the parasocial social media relationship. We're not trying to ignore you for a reason. Okay. So again, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure you get our free newsletter. The link is in the description, and we'll see you next Thursday at the same time. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good afternoon.